Today, this short tutorial is going to cover factor by grouping. So let's pretend we start off with a problem that says 6x cubed plus 10x squared plus 9x plus 15. The reason that factor by grouping should pop into our head is that we have 4 terms going on here. In previous lessons, when we've factored, we've only had 3 terms, but this time we have 4. So our first indication that we're going to be using factor by grouping is probably that you're going to see 4 terms. Now, 99.9% of the time, you're going to group your first 2 terms together and your second 2 terms together. And what we're looking for is their greatest common factor. So out of 6 and 10, the greatest common factor is a 2. And out of x cubed and x squared, they both have an x squared in common. So let's see what I would have left. I would have a 3 and an x. And remember, the way that we can double check our work here is if I were to multiply back through, 2 times 3 is 6, x squared times x is x to the third. So that way I just make sure that I pulled out my greatest common factor correctly. Now if I take a 2 out of the 10, meaning if I'm dividing by 2, I'd be left with a 5. And the entire x squared came out in front. So now let's look at my second term. Out of 9 and 15, I can pull out a positive 3. So that would leave me with a 3x and a 5. And again, to check my work, I can always distribute back through just to double check. 3 times 3x is 9x. 3 times 5 is 15. So now we know that we did our factor by grouping correctly because what I have factored is going to have a common term. So my 3x plus 5 is the same term both times. So if they are the same and they match, then I'm allowed to write it one time. And my greatest common factors that we pulled out in front are going to be my other factor. So my 2x squared plus my 3 is going to be my other portion of my factor. So again, you're going to recognize that it's time to use factor by grouping when you have 4 terms there. When you have 4 terms, 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, 99% of the time, you're going to group your first 2 terms and your second 2 terms together. You pull out their greatest common factor, and you know that you did it correctly or that you're allowed to use factor by grouping if the portion in parentheses matches each time. You rewrite that portion one time, and then your greatest common factors that pulled out in front also get written one time. So let's try one more time. So here I have x cubed plus 7x squared plus 3x plus 21. So let's group my first 2 terms together and let's see what they have in common. So this one just has a 1 in front, so they don't really have a number that I can pull out other than 1. But let's check out their x's. I have an x cubed and an x squared. So their greatest common factor, the most that they have in common, is x squared. So that would leave me with an x plus 7. And on my right-hand side, 3x and 21 have a 3 in common. I almost said 7. I have a 3 in common. That would leave me with an x plus a 7. So like we talked about in the last example, when your factors match, you rewrite them one time. Then you're taking your greatest common factors from out in front and making them a factor also. And that is how you use factor by grouping.